When Eleanor Vale reached Blackwater Mill, her uncle's men were already dismantling it. A wagon stood in the muddy yard with its boards lowered. 2 laborers carried out an iron gear between them, while a third worked a crowbar beneath the mill's surviving grain hopper. Villagers watched from the road, their faces turned toward the destruction with the solemn curiosity usually reserved for a funeral. Eleanor stepped down from the hired cart before it had fully stopped. "Put that back!" Her voice carried farther than she expected. The laborers hesitated, but only until Augustus Vale emerged from the mill doorway, brushing red dust from the sleeve of his black coat. He looked precisely as he had 6 days earlier at the solicitor's office, composed, prosperous, and mildly inconvenienced by her existence. "My dear Eleanor," he said, "you should have sent word. This property belongs to me." She removed the folded conveyance from her leather document case. The parchment bore Augustus's signature, 2 witnesses' names, and the red seal transferring Blackwater Mill to her, together with its buildings, mill race, and water rights. It was all she had received after her father's death. Augustus had inherited Alder House, the family warehouse, and every profitable portion of the Vale grain business. He claimed that Eleanor's father had left debts exceeding his assets. Rather than endure a public dispute, Augustus had offered his niece the abandoned mill and its £18 in unpaid parish rates. He called it generosity. Everyone else understood it as banishment. A thin man wearing the clerk's brass badge stepped away from the wagon. Eleanor recognized Mr. Pritchard from the magistrate's office. "Mr. Vale has presented a bill of sale for the machinery," he said, dated 3 weeks before the conveyance. "Then why was the machinery included in the inventory attached to my deed?" Pritchard glanced at Augustus rather than answering. Her uncle smiled. "Because old inventories are often copied without inspection. You know that better than most." Yes, she did. For 7 years, Eleanor had maintained her father's commercial books. He had taught her to balance rents against repairs, compare delivery weights with warehouse receipts, and find dishonesty concealed inside figures that appeared ordinary. After illness weakened his hands, she had prepared every quarterly account he signed. Yet following his death, Augustus had dismissed her records as the amateur work of an unmarried woman. Now, before half the village, he was using her training to mock her. "The wheel assembly cannot be removed," Eleanor said. "It is fixed to the property. The wheel is rotten. Then it would have no value to you." A murmur passed through the onlookers. For the first time, irritation disturbed Augustus's expression. "Take care. I spared you the embarrassment of learning how little your father truly left. You gave me a ruin carrying debts. I gave you exactly what you insisted upon receiving." That was nearly true. Eleanor had accepted Blackwater Mill because its name appeared repeatedly in her father's private working notes during the final months of his life. He had visited the place every Thursday, although the mill had stood idle for 12 years. When she asked why, he told her only that certain accounts could not be understood from a desk. 2 weeks later, he suffered the seizure from which he never recovered. Eleanor turned to Pritchard. "Until a magistrate examines both documents, nothing else leaves this yard." "The wagon is already loaded," Augustus said. "Then unload it." Silence settled over the road. Augustus came close enough that she smelled the cedar oil on his collar. "You possess £18, no income, and a building that will fall before winter. Challenge me, and your money will disappear into a solicitor's pocket before the first hearing." Eleanor's fear was immediate and humiliating because every word was practical. The west wall leaned toward the river. Half the roof had collapsed. She had paid 4 shillings merely to reach Belmere. Pride could not buy timber or bread, but surrender would leave her with nothing except the question her father had carried to his grave. She opened her document case and withdrew a narrow ledger bound in cracked brown calfskin. "I made a copy of the inventory before signing," she said. "Every removable gear bears an entry number. If one item leaves without being recorded, I will swear a complaint of unlawful conversion against the person who ordered it." Pritchard's posture stiffened. The laborers lowered the iron gear to the ground. Augustus stared at the book. For one brief instant, he was not angry. He was afraid. "Unload the wagon," he said. "My niece appears determined to inherit every piece of rubbish." He departed, without offering her transportation back to the village. By the time the wagon followed him, rain had begun stippling the river. An elderly woman remained beside the gate. She introduced herself as Martha Renlow, widow of Blackwater's last miller. From beneath her shawl, she produced a small oil-stained maintenance book. "Your father left this with my husband," she said. "He told him to keep it away from Alder House." Inside were repairs dating back 20 years. Eleanor read them while standing beneath the broken eaves. Most concerned belts, stones, sluice boards, and bearings. Then she reached the final page. One component had been inspected every Thursday for nearly a year. A small counting gear, connected to the water wheel's inner axle. It did not appear on any official inventory, and each entry had been signed with a name Eleanor had never encountered in the Vale accounts. J. Mercer. She entered the wheel chamber and found the axle beneath layers of cobweb and flour dust. Bolted to its side was a narrow iron housing. 4 bright scratches marked the screws, and the oil around them was fresh. Augustus's men had not come to take scrap. They had come searching for whatever the water wheel had been built to record. "Who was J. Mercer?" Eleanor asked. Martha Renlow looked toward the road where Augustus's wagon had disappeared. "My husband never told me." "But you recognized the name." The widow tightened her shawl. Rain silvered the gray strands of hair at her temples. "I recognized the fear on your uncle's face." Before Eleanor could press her, Martha placed the maintenance book in her hands and walked back toward Belmere, leaving her alone with the mill. The rain strengthened after sunset. Water entered through the broken roof, ran down the inner walls, and collected in shallow pools across the grinding floor. Eleanor carried her trunk into the former counting room, the only chamber with 3 sound walls and a door that still closed. Its fireplace was blocked with fallen mortar. Its window had no glass. She covered the opening with her traveling cloak and lit a candle on the desk. Her first inventory was discouraging. The mill contained 1 damaged grinding stone, 2 lengths of usable drive shaft, a rusted sack scale, and enough rotten timber to feed a stove she could not safely light. The miller's cottage beside the yard had lost half its roof. Its pump produced brown water, and the privy leaned at an angle that made entering it unwise. In her purse remained £17, 11 shillings and 8 pence. The parish rates were due in 12 days. Eleanor divided a page in her ledger into 4 columns: food, shelter, rates, and repairs. Even if she lived on bread and onions, she could not satisfy all 4. A temporary roof over the counting room would consume at least £2. Replacing the west wall supports might require 10. Restoring the wheel was beyond calculation until a millwright examined it. She stared at the figures until they blurred. Her father had taught her that an account was not a judgment. It was merely a truthful description of one moment. Change the work, the price, or the time, he used to say, and the account changed with it. But Blackwater Mill seemed to offer her no work, no price, and very little time. At dawn, Eleanor walked into Belmere, carrying the deed and a list of supplies. The village stood half a mile uphill, gathered around a market square darkened by rain. At the carpenter's shop, she asked the cost of 6 roofing boards and 2 braces. The carpenter read her name on the order and set down his pencil. Payment in advance. I expected that. And delivery is another 3 shillings. The mill road is less than a mile. Wagons break axles on bad roads. 2 customers near the door exchanged smiles. Eleanor understood. Augustus had already spoken to him. At the bakery, the woman behind the counter refused to extend a week's credit. The coal merchant claimed his smallest delivery had been promised elsewhere. Even the proprietor of the Blackmere Arms demanded payment for the single meal Eleanor had eaten there before visiting the mill. Only the blacksmith, Daniel Rusk, examined her list without mentioning Augustus. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with a burn scar across his left wrist. When Eleanor showed him a sketch of the iron housing attached to the water wheel axle, he studied it for several moments. "That is not part of a flour mill." "What is it?" "A counter, perhaps. The spindle should turn a numbered drum." He pointed to the measurements she had written beside the drawing. "But a gear that small would not count the wheel's revolutions directly. It would count something slower." "Such as hours?" "Possibly, or changes in the sluice position." Eleanor showed him the maintenance entry signed J. Mercer. Daniel's expression closed. "You know the name." "I know that asking about it cost my father his position." Before she could question him, he returned the page. "I cannot work for you, Miss Vale." "Because of my uncle?" "Because I have 2 children, and a lease that Augustus Vale can end at Michaelmas." He turned away, but not before quietly sliding a small, square-headed iron key across the counter. "This was brought to me yesterday," he said. "One of Vale's men wanted a copy made. I told him the wards were too badly worn." "Where does it fit?" He did not say, but the black residue in its teeth is not rust. It is old mill grease. Eleanor closed her fingers around the key. Back at Blackwater, the rain had raised the river nearly a foot, yet the channel leading toward the water wheel remained strangely shallow. She followed the mill race upstream through nettles and wet reeds until she reached a stone sluice set into the bank. The gate had been lowered and secured with a new chain. Beyond it, most of the river's flow had been diverted into a narrower channel running east, away from her land and toward the Vale warehouse. Eleanor unfolded her conveyance. The mill's water rights were described clearly, but the attached boundary plan showed only the main river. The eastern channel did not appear at all. She knelt beside the sluice and scraped moss from its locking plate. Beneath the green stain was a keyhole with a square-headed opening. The key Daniel had given her fitted perfectly. When Eleanor turned it, something moved inside the stonework, not at the gate, but beneath her feet. A concealed iron indicator rose from the bank, carrying a row of stamped numbers and a single engraved letter, M. The final number matched an entry in her father's private accounts, dated 4 days before his death. Eleanor copied the number from the indicator into her ledger, then locked the sluice again. She did not raise the gate until she understood the river and the weakened wheel. Releasing the full current might destroy the machinery, or bring half the west wall down with it. Back in the counting room, she opened the private account book she had carried from Alderhouse. The matching entry contained no explanation, only 3 abbreviated lines in her father's hand. M 4721, BW 2/5, difference carried east. Ask Renlow before Michaelmas. The figures beside those words did not represent money. Eleanor tested pounds, shillings, grain weights, delivery distances, and warehouse totals, but none reconciled with 4721. Her father had taught her never to force a conclusion merely because she wanted one. She marked the entry with a strip of paper and turned to the problem she could solve: the parish rates. At noon she returned to Blackmere and requested the assessment books from Mr. Pritchard. He refused at first, claiming the records were not available for private disputes. Eleanor reminded him that any rated occupier could inspect the valuation affecting her own property. Reluctantly, he brought out 3 broad volumes. Blackwater Mill had been assessed at the annual value of £72 when it still produced flour. That valuation remained unchanged through every subsequent year. Although the same books recorded that the miller's cottage was uninhabited, the grinding trade had ceased, and part of the roof had collapsed. "You have charged a working mill's rate against a ruin," Eleanor said. The amount was approved by Augustus Vale, while he served as parish overseer. Pritchard's cheeks reddened. "Your uncle did not write the law." No, but he signed these assessments. She placed the maintenance book beside the valuation register. Entries in Martha's husband's hand established when the main shaft failed and production ended. A delivery account from her father's private book showed that the final flour shipment had left Blackwater 12 years earlier. Eleanor prepared a written objection and requested that collection be suspended until the parish overseers reviewed the property's true annual value. Pritchard could not lawfully promise a reduction, but with the evidence laid openly across his desk, neither could he justify immediate seizure. "You have 14 days," he said. "That will be sufficient." She did not know whether it would be, but when she left the office, the £18 demand no longer felt like a sentence. It had become an argument, and arguments could be proved. Martha Renlow was waiting at the mill when Eleanor returned. Beside her stood a handcart loaded with old roof slates, a coil of rope, 2 blankets, and a covered basket. "These came from my shed," Martha said. "The slates are sound. I cannot accept them without payment. I did not offer them without payment. I want the truth about my husband." Eleanor showed her the 3 lines in her father's book. At the name Renlow, the widow sat heavily on an overturned flour bin. "My Samuel met your father here every Thursday," she said. "He would come home after dark with mud on his boots and say they were measuring the river. When I asked why, he told me that a mill could be robbed without anyone taking a single sack of grain. Did he ever mention 2/5?" Martha looked toward the eastern bank. "He said Blackwater was entitled to 2 shares of every 5 passing the upper marker. The arrangement was older than either of us. The other shares served farms farther down the valley. But most of the water now runs east. That channel was not there when the mill worked." Eleanor felt the separate facts draw closer, without yet forming a complete picture. Augustus had not inherited a naturally failing mill. Someone had deprived it of the water required to survive. She and Martha spent the afternoon reclaiming the counting room. They removed ruined plaster, swept out mouse nests, and carried broken furniture into the yard. Using slates from the handcart, Eleanor covered the largest gap above the room. She could not replace the roof properly, but by dusk the floor remained dry beneath a steady rain. Martha repaired the fireplace draft with a piece of sheet iron Samuel had once used behind their stove. For the first time since Eleanor arrived, a small fire burned safely at Blackwater. Over bread and cold meat from the basket, Eleanor examined Samuel's maintenance entries again. She noticed that his weekly inspections ceased on the same date that the eastern diversion first appeared in her father's delivery accounts. Blackwater had not slowly lost trade. Its production had fallen by nearly half within 1 quarter, then stopped entirely. "Your husband was owed 11 shillings and 6pence when the mill closed," Eleanor said. Martha gave a tired smile. There was no money to pay anyone. "The debt transferred with the property. You cannot afford it. Not tonight, but I will enter it under wages payable, not erase it as my uncle did." For several seconds, Martha said nothing. Then she moved her chair closer to the fire. "You should not sleep here alone," she said. "I will stay until the door has a proper lock." It was the first kindness Eleanor had received in Blackmere that did not feel like pity. After Martha fell asleep, Eleanor returned to the wheel chamber with her candle. She cleaned flour dust from the iron housing and compared its screws with the square-headed key. The key did not fit them. Instead, it entered a nearly invisible slot beneath the axle. A quarter turn released a narrow brass drawer. Inside lay no document or money. There was only a row of small engraved plates, each stamped with a date and a 5-digit reading. Eleanor arranged them chronologically on the floor. The readings rose steadily for 9 years. Then, on the plate dated 1 week after the Eastern Channel was completed, the recorded flow through Blackwater fell by exactly 3/5. The mill had preserved a mechanical account of every measure of water Augustus had taken. Eleanor did not touch the plates again until Martha was awake. Together they recorded the position of each piece, the order in which it had been stored, and every number stamped into its surface. Eleanor made pencil rubbings on thin paper, then wrapped the originals in oilcloth. She gave half to Martha and concealed the remainder beneath a loose floorboard in the counting room. "Why divide them?" Martha asked. "Because my uncle searched the mill once. He will search it again." The plates established that the flow had changed, but they did not yet prove who had altered it, or whether Blackwater possessed a lawful claim to the missing water. Augustus could dismiss the mechanism as an abandoned experiment. He might even accuse Eleanor of engraving the plates herself. She needed records that had existed before the dispute. Over the next 8 days, Eleanor divided her time between preserving the mill and tracing its past. The parish overseers inspected Blackwater and could not deny that its old valuation was absurd. They reduced the outstanding demand to £6 and 4 shillings, payable in 2 installments. The decision saved Eleanor from immediate seizure, but it did not make her solvent. She spent £2 on reclaimed timber, 12 shillings on nails and lime, and another shilling each day for the carpenter and his apprentice. They braced the counting room, repaired its door, and covered enough of the roof to protect the machinery below. The carpenter refused to work on the leaning west wall without a mason. "The stones are separating beneath the wheel chamber," he warned. "If the river rises hard, this corner may go with it." A mason's estimate consumed nearly everything Eleanor had left on paper. She postponed the work and hated herself for doing so. Each evening, she studied the brass plates beside Samuel Renlow's maintenance book. Small dots had been punched beside certain readings. At first she assumed they indicated repairs, but their dates corresponded with inspections rather than breakdowns. Every 5th plate bore 2 dots. Every 20th bore 3. "It is an index," Eleanor said. "These marks refer to another record." Martha remembered that Samuel once kept rolled charts in the mill office. Augustus's men had removed them after the closure. On the 9th morning, a letter arrived from Augustus's solicitor. He offered Eleanor £25 for Blackwater Mill, provided she transferred the property immediately and released every claim connected with its past operation. £25 was enough to clear the rates, repair the miller's cottage, and support her for months elsewhere. It was also more than Augustus had claimed the ruin was worth. Eleanor copied the offer into her ledger and placed the original beside the brass rubbings. Her uncle's generosity had always appeared when silence was required. That afternoon, she visited the Blackmere tithe barn, where old parish maps were stored in a locked cabinet. Pritchard objected again, but Eleanor presented the overseer's inspection order, which described her as Blackwater's lawful occupier. With visible displeasure, he allowed her 1 hour. The oldest map showed the river before the eastern diversion. Beside Blackwater Mill, the surveyor had drawn a narrow rectangular structure beneath the wheel chamber and labeled it MR. A later map omitted the structure. The newest showed the eastern channel, but in paler ink than the surrounding boundaries. Eleanor held the sheet toward the window. Beneath the added channel, she could see faint scraping where an earlier line had been removed. "Who amended this map?" she asked. Pritchard remained at his desk. "Surveyors, presumably." "There is no surveyor's signature." "Then the name has been lost." Eleanor compared the ink with the handwritten valuation notes Augustus had signed 12 years earlier. The color and fading were identical, but resemblance was not proof. She turned back to the oldest map. In its lower corner was a notation, Mercer Register number 4721, allocation fixed at 2 parts in 5, reference deposited with Mill Covenant, 1849. The number on the concealed sluice indicator was not a measurement. It identified the entire water-regulating system. "Where are the mill covenants kept?" Pritchard looked toward the cabinet, then lowered his voice. "There is no covenant for Blackwater. The map states that one was deposited. Then it was removed before I became clerk." "By whom?" He closed the valuation book with unnecessary force. "You have used your hour." When Eleanor returned to the mill, Daniel Rusk was waiting in the yard. Augustus's solicitor had visited his forge that morning and asked whether Eleanor had shown him any keys or mechanical parts. Daniel now understood that silence would not protect him. "My father worked beneath this mill," he said. "He called the place under the wheel the measuring room. Samuel Renlow sealed its entrance when the eastern channel opened." "Why?" "Because someone came looking for the master register." Daniel led Eleanor into the wheel chamber and pointed toward the tail race where dark water passed beneath the building. At ordinary level, the lower masonry was hidden, but the eastern diversion had reduced the flow enough to expose the top of a stone arch. At its center was another square-headed lock. They lowered a lantern from the bank. Behind the arch, something metallic reflected the flame. Then Daniel noticed the mortar along its upper edge. "These stones were not merely sealed," he said. "They were arranged to collapse if the door was forced." At that moment, a deep crack sounded inside the west wall. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the water wheel shifted against its failing supports. The measuring room, and whatever remained inside it, was beginning to sink into the river. Daniel seized Eleanor's arm and pulled her beneath the main beam as another fragment of mortar struck the floor. "Out," he ordered. They reached the yard before a second crack traveled through the west wall. The stones did not collapse, but the wheel settled several inches lower, twisting the axle inside its bearings. Water surged through the widened gaps around the foundation. Eleanor stood in the rain and watched the building consume the work she had already paid for. The new roof braces were the only timbers long enough to support the wheel chamber. Removing them would expose the counting room again, but leaving them in place might cost her the entire mill. "Take the braces," she said. By afternoon, Daniel and the carpenter had wedged the timbers beneath the failing beam. Martha carried the brass plates and Eleanor's account books to her cottage for safety. A mason from the next parish charged £2.08 to reset the worst stones and build a temporary pier beneath the axle. The repairs bought time, not security. Eleanor paid him from the money reserved for her first-rate installment. That evening, a solicitor's clerk arrived with Augustus's revised offer. £40, valid until noon the following day. "He knows the wall is failing," Eleanor said. The clerk shrugged. "Mr. Vale considers the increased sum an act of compassion." Eleanor wrote "refused" across the offer and signed her name beneath it. The following morning, she and Daniel examined the measuring room arch from the tail race. The masonry above the door had been set around a movable iron bar. If the door opened while the bar remained engaged, the upper stones would lose their support and fall into the passage. "It was designed to destroy the room," Daniel said. "No," Eleanor replied. "It was designed to destroy the room if someone entered incorrectly." The punch dots on the brass plates were not merely references to a missing register. They marked the position of the water wheel at regular intervals. 3 dots appeared whenever the mechanism returned to its starting point. Eleanor studied the earliest plate, then counted the teeth on the exposed section of the axle gear. One tooth bore a faint triangular notch. If the wheel turned until that notch aligned with the iron housing, the hidden counterweight should lift the locking bar. Daniel fitted a temporary handle to the shaft. Moving the wheel by hand required both of them, and each turn produced a grinding complaint from the damaged bearings. After 23 teeth, the triangular mark reached the top of the housing. A heavy metallic sound came from beneath the floor. At the tail race, the iron bar had withdrawn from the masonry. The square-headed key opened the door. Air escaped from the measuring room with the cold mineral smell of a cellar. Daniel entered first with a lantern, while Eleanor followed through the low arch. The room had been built inside the mill's foundation, its ceiling supported by dressed stone ribs. Copper pipes ran along one wall and connected the upper sluice to a waist-high brass mechanism in the center. The device resembled a clock without a face. Floats, chains, and numbered drums measured the height and duration of the river's flow. A second set of gears divided that movement into 5 equal shares. 2 were directed toward Blackwater and the lower farms. 3 passed through the main river channel. The eastern diversion had not merely reduced the mill's water, it had reversed the intended allocation. Along the walls stood shallow iron cabinets sealed with waxed cloth. Most contained calibration tables, repair instructions, and carefully drawn plans signed only J. Mercer. The papers had survived because the chamber remained dry and because each cabinet included a tray of powdered lime to absorb moisture. Eleanor opened the largest cabinet. At its center was an empty cylindrical cradle. Dust covered the surrounding shelf, but the brass clips holding the cylinder had been polished by recent contact. Someone had removed the master register. Below the cradle lay a single folded sheet. It was not the covenant, but a memorandum written by Samuel Renlow and witnessed by Eleanor's father. We have compared the mechanical register with the warehouse pumping accounts. The difference is deliberate. AV has taken the lower farm's share since September 1861 and concealed the receipts under carriage expenditure. The master record must remain beyond his reach until the covenant is recovered. Eleanor read the sentence twice. The Eastern Channel did not power an ordinary warehouse. It fed pumps belonging to the Vale business. Augustus had diverted water protected by covenant, then concealed the value he gained from it inside false transport expenses. Her father had known. At the bottom of the memorandum, beneath Samuel's signature, was another line in Thomas Vale's hand. If I fail, the proof must pass to Eleanor. She knows how to make the debt accounts speak. For the first time since his death, Eleanor heard her father's confidence more clearly than her uncle's contempt. Daniel lifted a narrow wooden case from the lowest shelf. Its velvet lining held 6 precision tools and an engraved brass plaque. The Mercer Proportional River Register, designed for the Blackwater Cooperative, 1849 patent application refused. Why was it refused? Daniel asked. Eleanor examined the plans. The calculations were more advanced than anything in her father's books, but the handwriting beside them was small and elegant. On one page, the author had written a full name before crossing it out and replacing it with an initial. The ink beneath the line remained faintly visible. Josephine Mercer. J. Mercer had not been an obscure mechanic. She had been a woman whose invention governed the river, and whose name had been deliberately erased from every public record Eleanor had found. Before they could examine the remaining cabinets, Martha called down from the wheel chamber. A carriage had stopped in the yard. Augustus had come to claim the measuring room for himself. Eleanor returned the memorandum to its cabinet and carried Josephine Mercer's plans into the wheel chamber before Augustus reached the door. He entered with Mr. Pritchard and 2 men from the Vale warehouse. His gaze moved from the temporary braces to the open arch above the tail race. He did not appear surprised to see the measuring room. You knew it was there, Eleanor said. I knew your father wasted a great deal of time searching this ruin. He found evidence that you diverted protected water. Augustus removed his gloves slowly. You have found an obsolete machine designed by a woman whose patent was rejected. That is not evidence. It is scrap. Then why did you send men to remove it? The machinery was sold to me before the property passed to you. A fixed regulator beneath the foundation was not listed in your bill of sale. Pritchard cleared his throat. The structure may not lie within Miss Vale's boundary. It is absent from the plan attached to her conveyance. It appears on the original parish map, Eleanor replied. An earlier map is not necessarily controlling. Augustus's smile returned. Every answer had been prepared before his carriage reached Blackwater. He stepped toward the tail race, but Daniel blocked the arch. The lower pier is unsafe, Daniel said. No one enters until it is properly supported. You no longer work here, Rusk. I am advising the owner. You live in one of my cottages. Daniel's face hardened. Until Michaelmas, Augustus continued. After that, the cottage will be required for another family. The threat was delivered gently enough for Pritchard to pretend he had not heard it. Eleanor understood what Augustus wanted. If Daniel lost his home because he helped her, every other tradesman in Blackmere would learn the cost of standing beside Blackwater. Her uncle turned to her. £60 for the mill, the machinery, and every paper you found below it. I will also renew Rusk's lease. Daniel looked at Eleanor. Shame, anger, and fear passed across his face in equal measure. My family is not part of her bargain, he said. You made them part of it when you chose a side. Eleanor had £60 neither in property nor in savings. She possessed a failing wall, an unpaid rate installment, and documents that might never survive a court challenge. Accepting would free Daniel, pay Martha's wages, and allow Eleanor to leave Blackmere with enough money to begin elsewhere. But the memorandum in the measuring room named Lower Farms whose owners had been deprived of water for 12 years. Samuel Renlow had protected the evidence at the cost of his livelihood. Her father had died believing she could complete the work he had failed to finish. No, Eleanor said. Augustus's expression became still. She continued before fear could weaken her voice. Mr. Rusk's tenancy has no relation to my title. If you evict his children to suppress a witness, I will include that fact in every statement I submit. Submit to whom? The county magistrates, the drainage commissioners, and any newspaper willing to print the figures from your pumping accounts. She did not yet possess those accounts, but Augustus reacted before he could conceal it. His eyes moved toward the brass plates lying on the work table. That glance told Eleanor the plates mattered. Augustus took one step forward. Martha immediately placed herself between him and the table. You will leave, Eleanor said, or I will swear that you entered my property after being ordered out. Pritchard touched Augustus's sleeve. Whatever private authority her uncle expected to exercise, he could not seize disputed property in front of 3 witnesses without a court order. This is not finished, Augustus said. No, Eleanor replied. It has only become visible. By sunset, Daniel's eviction notice had been nailed to his cottage door. He came to Blackwater with the paper folded inside his coat. His wife, Anne, and their 2 children had until Michaelmas, 5 days, to leave. The youngest had suffered a winter fever the previous year and could not sleep safely beneath a leaking roof. I will tell the magistrate I saw nothing, Daniel said, if that is what ends it. Eleanor looked toward the miller's cottage. One room remained mostly dry. The chimney needed pointing, 2 windows required boards, and part of the roof could be covered with the slates Martha had brought. You will move here, she said. I cannot pay rent. You already paid it when you helped save the wheel chamber. The necessary repairs would consume the money reserved for Eleanor's parish installment. Failure to pay could allow the overseers to seize movable property from the mill. She knew precisely what the choice might cost. She made it anyway. For 3 days, they worked on the cottage. Eleanor sold the silver clasp from her mother's traveling case for £1 and 7 shillings. The carpenter repaired the rafters at half his previous rate after learning why the family had been evicted. Martha scrubbed soot from the walls. Anne Rusk patched the window coverings and restored the kitchen hearth. By Michaelmas Eve, the cottage was poor but habitable. That night, the 4 adults gathered in the counting room to compare the Mercer plates with Thomas Vale's warehouse figures. Eleanor discovered that carriage expenditure rose and fell in exact proportion to the stolen water. Augustus had disguised the savings created by the illegal pumps as payments to imaginary transport contractors. One name appeared repeatedly, Calder and Finch, Derby. Daniel knew of no such firm. Eleanor added the amounts. Over 12 years, the false payments exceeded £4,000. The diversion had not merely ruined Blackwater. It had helped finance Augustus's entire expansion. Shortly after midnight, Eleanor woke to the sound of the water wheel turning. The river was not high enough to move it. She ran outside and saw lantern light disappearing along the eastern path. At the upper sluice, the new chain lay cut in the mud. Someone had raised Blackwater's gate to its full height. The diverted river thundered down the neglected mill race. Daniel reached the yard as the first wall brace split. "Get everyone out!" Eleanor cried. Behind them, the water wheel began to spin faster than it had in 12 years, driving the Mercer mechanism toward destruction. Daniel ran to the cottage, while Eleanor fought her way upstream beside the mill race. The water reached her knees before she arrived at the sluice. The chain had been cut with a cold chisel. Worse, the locking pawl that controlled the gate's descent had been removed. When Eleanor released the handle, the iron wheel spun freely and nearly broke her wrist. Without the pawl, the weight of the river held the gate open. Daniel returned after moving Anne and the children to Martha's cottage. "We cannot lower it from here," he said. "There is another control in the measuring room. The lower wall is already moving. If the wheel breaks at this speed, the wall will move with it." They tied ropes around their waists and entered through the wheel chamber. The floor shook beneath them. Wooden teeth snapped from the main gear and struck the walls like thrown stones. Inside the measuring room, water forced itself through the copper pipe joints. The 5-part regulator spun so rapidly that its numbered drums became a blur. Eleanor remembered Josephine's plans. The machine contained an emergency balance lever that could return 3 shares of the river to the main channel. It was designed to operate only when the wheel's triangular mark aligned with the housing. The mark flashed past too quickly to count. "Watch the axle," Eleanor told Daniel. "Call when the notch reaches the top." He crouched beside the mechanism, while she gripped the balance lever with both hands. "Now." She pulled. The lever resisted. Daniel seized it beside her, and together they forced it downward. Somewhere beneath the chamber, an iron gate shifted. The roar in the mill race weakened as part of the river returned to its original course. But the relief came too late. The wheel's outer rim split. A section of timber tore free and crashed through the west wall. The temporary pier buckled. Daniel threw Eleanor toward the arch as the axle dropped behind them. They reached the upper floor just before the measuring room ceiling collapsed. The entire western corner of Blackwater Mill fell into the tail race. For several minutes, nothing could be heard except the river grinding over stone. Eleanor stood in the yard with blood running from a cut above her eyebrow. Half the wheel remained visible in the wreckage. The other half lay beneath broken masonry and black water. The first pale light of morning revealed footsteps along the eastern path and a dropped lantern wick beside the cut chain. Neither identified the person who had opened the gate. At 8 o'clock, Augustus arrived with Pritchard and the parish constable. He surveyed the ruins with convincing horror. "My niece has destroyed a regulated watercourse," he said. "The sudden change damaged 2 pumps at the Vale Works." "Someone cut the chain and removed the locking pawl," Eleanor replied. Augustus examined the severed links. "Or you cut it yourself to restore what you imagine are your rights." Daniel stepped forward. "I saw the gate fully open before Miss Vale reached it. You are living on her property and working at her direction. Your statement has little independence." The constable collected the chain and the lantern wick, but arrested no one. There was evidence of sabotage, but none proving who had committed it. 3 days later, Augustus obtained an interim order preventing Eleanor from operating either sluice until ownership of the measuring structure and eastern channel could be determined. The upper gate was locked under parish seal. Without water, Blackwater could not grind grain. Without the wheel, it could not operate the Mercer register. Without the west wall, no insurer or lender would advance money against the property. Then the parish overseers issued a distress notice for Eleanor's missed installment. The repaired sack scale, the surviving grinding gear, and several lengths of drive shaft were marked for seizure. The movable assets Augustus had failed to carry away on Eleanor's first day would now be sold under lawful authority. Eleanor sat in the roofless counting room and entered every loss. West wall, beyond present means. Water wheel, destroyed. Mercer chamber, flooded. Rates and costs, £4, 17 shillings. Cash remaining, 9 pence. Numbers had always given her order. This time, they offered no path forward. Martha placed a cup of tea beside the ledger. "Your father failed before you did." Eleanor looked up sharply. "I do not mean he was weak," Martha said. "I mean Augustus stopped him too. Samuel believed the master register would bring justice, but your father said a machine could prove quantity, not ownership. They still needed the covenant. The covenant is gone." "Then why did they hide the register?" "To preserve the measurements until the covenant could be found." Martha nodded toward the ruined wheel. "Samuel used to say the safest hiding place was the thing no thief could carry." Eleanor looked through the broken wall. Augustus's men had tried to remove the smaller gears. They had searched the iron housing and sent Daniel's father beneath the mill. Yet the main axle had remained fixed inside the stone bearings for decades. It was too heavy to steal and too ordinary to suspect. She and Daniel entered the wreckage after the river fell. With ropes secured around the surviving beam, they cleared timber from the fractured shaft. The axle was hollow. 6 inches inside it, protected by an iron cap sealed with black mill grease, lay the end of a copper cylinder. The same cylinder whose empty cradle they had found in the measuring room. Daniel carefully loosened the damaged cap. The cylinder would not slide free. Its inner end remained caught beneath the collapsed wheel, and removing it would require lifting several hundred pounds of wreckage. Eleanor wiped grease from the exposed copper. 3 names had been engraved around its rim: Josephine Mercer, Samuel Renlow, Thomas Vale. Beneath them was a 4th inscription: "For Eleanor Vale, when the river is made to answer." The sabotage had destroyed Blackwater's wheel. It had also revealed the proof Augustus had spent 12 years trying to find. Removing the cylinder required nearly 2 days. Daniel built a lifting frame from the mill's surviving roof beams. The carpenter brought a block and tackle without asking for advance payment, though he warned Eleanor that the ropes must be returned undamaged. Martha persuaded 2 former mill laborers to help clear the stones. Neither man spoke warmly to Eleanor, but both had lost work when Blackwater closed. By the 2nd afternoon, they had raised the broken axle far enough for Daniel to draw out the copper cylinder. Eleanor carried it to Martha's cottage, where the table had been covered with clean linen. The seal around its lid bore the same number as the sluice indicator and the parish map, 4721. Martha, Daniel, and the carpenter witnessed Eleanor breaking it. Inside lay a brass recording drum wrapped in greased wool, 3 rolls of parchment, and a packet of papers protected by waxed silk. The contents were dry. The first parchment was the Blackwater Mill and River Covenant of 1849. It bore the seals of 4 landowners, the signatures of 12 tenant farmers, and the mark of Josephine Mercer Vale. The covenant fixed the river's division at 2 shares in 5 for Blackwater Mill and the lower farms. Those rights could not be separated from the mill or transferred to an upstream business. The owner of Blackwater was required to maintain the register, publish its quarterly measurements, and operate the mill at regulated prices during poor harvests. The measuring room and upper sluice were explicitly included within Blackwater's boundary. A receipt attached to the parchment confirmed that a duplicate had been deposited with the county clerk under reference 4721M. The parish copy had disappeared, but the county copy might still exist. The second roll contained Josephine's complete designs for the proportional regulator. She had created a machine that divided water according to an agreed share, while producing a permanent mechanical record of every change. Her plans also described simpler versions for village pumps, irrigation channels, and small mills unable to afford a full measuring room. The rejected patent application had not failed because the device was unsound. Josephine's financial sponsor had withdrawn after learning that she intended Blackwater's design to belong to a cooperative rather than a private company. Without his declaration and fee, the application had never proceeded to examination. She refused to let one man own the river, Eleanor said. The final parchment was a family settlement. It established Josephine Mercer Vale as the mother of Thomas and Augustus Vale, and Eleanor's grandmother. After Josephine's death, Augustus had taken control of the profitable grain warehouses. Thomas had accepted Blackwater's oversight because he believed the cooperative protected itself through the covenant and master register. Augustus inherited the business built around his mother's work. Then he erased her name from it. The packet of papers revealed what followed. Samuel Renlow had recorded the river readings each quarter. Thomas had compared them with pumping hours at the Vale Works. Together, they established that Augustus opened the Eastern Diversion in September 1861 and began taking Blackwater's entire 2/5 share. The loss of water reduced the mill's production by 43% during the first quarter. Within 2 years, Blackwater closed. 7 lower farms suffered failed wells or reduced irrigation. Augustus purchased 3 of them at depressed prices. The imaginary payments to Calder and Finch concealed the value of the water and transport costs saved by the pumps. The firm had no address, employees, or tax entry. Its initials came from Calder Field and Finch Meadow, the first 2 farms Augustus acquired after the diversion ruined them. Thomas's final reconciliation placed the concealed benefit at £4,312. At the bottom, he had written, "Augustus believes a profit becomes honest if it is entered beneath an innocent name. Eleanor understands that every account must answer to something real." A separate letter was addressed to her. Thomas explained that he had confronted his brother after recovering the master register. Augustus denied the covenant remained valid and threatened to use Thomas's debts to seize the mill before evidence could be presented. When Thomas became ill, he and Samuel concealed the cylinder inside the hollow axle. He had intended to transfer Blackwater directly to Eleanor. Augustus, acting as executor, suppressed the unsigned draft and claimed Thomas's personal debts consumed the estate. Yet Augustus made one mistake. He conveyed Blackwater to Eleanor voluntarily, believing the master register had already been removed or destroyed. That signed conveyance placed the covenant, measuring room, water rights, and every fixed part of the Mercer system in her lawful possession. Her uncle had given her the very property required to bring the claim. The final pages were not accounts. They were letters Josephine had written to Thomas when he was a young man. She described Blackwater as a promise that no prosperous mill should survive by leaving its neighbors dry. She believed the register's true purpose was not measuring water, but making power visible to those forced to depend upon it. Eleanor had inherited more than evidence of theft. She had inherited a working design, a public covenant, her grandmother's erased authorship, her father's unfinished case, and a mill whose survival was tied to the survival of the farms around it. The next morning she laid copies before the lower farmers. Some distrusted her. One accused every Vale of profiting from their losses. But the former owners of Calder Field and Finch Meadow recognized their signatures on the covenant and agreed to testify about the failed wells and forced sales. Daniel produced the cut chain. Martha produced Samuel's maintenance book. The carpenter confirmed the measuring room predated the Eastern Channel. Eleanor added the brass plates, the master drum, Augustus's purchase offers, the altered parish map, and her reconciliation of the false accounts. She sent a formal petition to the county magistrates, requesting preservation of the deposited covenant, inspection of the Vale pumping books, and removal of the order preventing Blackwater from receiving its lawful share. 3 days later, a county clerk arrived in Belmere. He carried the original covenant from the archives. Its seals matched the copy found inside the water wheel. A public hearing was ordered for the following Monday. Augustus could no longer defeat Eleanor by destroying one building or intimidating one witness. The river's history now existed in machinery, maps, accounts, property records, and the memories of people he had dispossessed. For the first time, Eleanor was not preparing merely to defend Blackwater. She was preparing to make her uncle answer for everything he had built upon its ruin. The hearing filled Belmere's assembly hall before the county commissioners arrived. Farmers stood along the walls. Workers from the Vale pumping works gathered near the rear doors. Augustus sat beside two solicitors at the front table, dressed in mourning black as though he were the injured party. Eleanor brought no speech. She brought accounts. The county clerk first produced the deposited covenant. Its reference number, seals, boundaries, and water allocation matched the copy recovered from the axle. A surveyor confirmed that the measuring room and upper sluice lay within Blackwater's original boundary. The eastern channel had been cut across land governed by the covenant without the required consent of the lower farmers. Augustus's solicitor argued that the agreement had fallen into disuse when the mill closed. The mill closed because it was deprived of the water guaranteed by the agreement, Eleanor replied. That is your interpretation. No, it is the sequence recorded by the machine. Daniel placed the brass drum inside the surviving Mercer housing. The quarterly plates matched its engraved readings without a single break until September 1861. Samuel's maintenance book confirmed the dates. Josephine's calibration tables showed how each revolution corresponded to a measured volume passing the sluice. A county engineer had tested the surviving gears during the previous week. He did not determine the dispute, but he verified that the mechanism could not produce the sudden 3/5 reduction unless the allocation gate had been changed. The commissioners then opened the Vale pumping books, which Augustus had been ordered to produce. Several pages were missing. Augustus claimed they had been damaged by damp. Eleanor pointed out that only the quarters corresponding with the eastern channel's construction had disappeared. Entries before and after them remained perfectly legible. She placed her father's copied statements beside the surviving originals. Thomas had reproduced not merely the totals but page numbers, invoice references, and clerk's initials. The sequence made the removed figures recoverable. Calder and Finch provided carriage services, Augustus said. My brother misunderstood the accounts. Where was the firm located? Eleanor asked. Derby. At what address? I did not manage every contractor personally. Which clerk approved its invoices? Augustus looked toward his former bookkeeper, seated among the witnesses. The man lowered his eyes. Eleanor opened the Vale cash book. No payment was ever issued to Calder and Finch. The amounts were entered as expenses, but the money remained in the business and was transferred at each year's end into Mr. Vale's capital account. One commissioner leaned forward. You are saying the expense existed only on paper? Yes. The figures represented the benefit created by water taken without payment. My uncle used a fictitious contractor to conceal how much the diversion saved his pumps. She then showed that the supposed carriage costs rose during dry quarters, when Blackwater's 2/5 share was most valuable, and fell when the river ran high. The changes matched the Mercer readings within less than 2%. The coincidence repeated 47 times. It was not coincidence. Augustus's greatest defense had always been the respectability of his books. He believed orderly columns made dishonesty invisible. Instead, the precision with which he concealed the stolen water allowed Eleanor to measure the theft year by year. The owners of Calder Field and Finch Meadow testified next. Their wells weakened after the diversion. Their harvests failed. Augustus purchased both properties for less than half their previous assessed value. The initials assigned to the imaginary contractor came from the land he acquired. Martha read Samuel's memorandum aloud. Daniel described the cut chain, missing locking pawl, and midnight release of the sluice. The commissioners made no finding about who had sabotaged the gate, but they referred the incident for further investigation. Then Pritchard was called. At first, he claimed ignorance of the altered parish map. Under questioning, however, the county clerk produced the cabinet access register. Augustus had signed out the original map on the same day the eastern channel was added. Pritchard admitted that Augustus later instructed him to treat the amended sheet as authoritative, despite the missing surveyor's signature. The public mask Augustus had preserved for 12 years began to fail. He rose before his solicitor could stop him. "Every improvement in this village came from the Vale Works," he said. "I employed men while Blackwater rotted. I purchased farms their owners could not maintain. And now my niece expects to destroy a productive business because an unsuccessful woman drew a machine 24 years ago." The insult settled across the hall. Eleanor did not answer it. She placed Josephine's designs beside the covenant and let Augustus's contempt explain why her name had vanished. The commissioners ruled that Blackwater's water rights remained valid, that the eastern diversion violated the covenant, and that the interim restriction against Eleanor must be removed. The allocation gate was to be restored to 2 shares in 5 under independent supervision. They also ordered a full audit of the Vale Works, preservation of Augustus's property records, and assessment of compensation owed to Blackwater and the lower farms. The altered maps and executors' records were referred to the county court. Augustus could not sell or mortgage the disputed properties while the inquiry continued. His control of the river ended that afternoon. Workers removed the parish seal and reset Josephine's regulator. Water returned to Blackwater's mill race in its lawful measure, filling the dry channel and continuing toward the lower farms. Villagers followed it downhill. Some apologized to Eleanor. Others simply watched. One farmer remained unconvinced, muttering that court orders did not rebuild walls or feed families. Eleanor knew he was right. When she returned to the mill, water moved beneath the wreckage where the wheel had once stood. Blackwater possessed its river again, but no machinery capable of using it. Augustus waited beside the ruined gate. "If you continue," he said, "the audit will destroy the Vale business. Hundreds may lose their wages." "You used their wages as a shield after using our grandmother's work as a weapon. I can rebuild this mill. Withdraw the fraud complaint, and I will restore everything." Eleanor looked at the broken wall, the flooded chamber, and the cottage where Daniel's children now slept safely. "You still believe restoration means returning things to your control." She walked past him. Behind her, the river entered Blackwater in 2 measured shares out of 5, exactly as Josephine Mercer had intended. Justice had returned the water. Now Eleanor had to build something worthy of it. The rebuilding began with a ledger. Eleanor listed every task in the order required to make Blackwater safe, useful, and profitable. The west foundation came first. Then the roof, tail race, axle bearings, and water wheel. Grinding stones and decorative repairs would wait. She refused to spend money the mill had not earned or been legally awarded. During the winter, the county audit confirmed that Augustus had concealed £4,312 in benefits obtained from the diverted water. It also uncovered false statements in Thomas Vale's estate accounts and proved that Augustus had exaggerated his brother's debts to justify taking the profitable assets. One of the warehouse laborers admitted that Augustus's foreman had ordered him to open Blackwater's sluice and remove the locking pawl. He had believed the abandoned wheel would simply break. He had not known the Rusk family was living beside it. The foreman's payment appeared in the Vale books under emergency drainage work. Once again, Augustus had recorded his own wrongdoing because he could not tolerate an unbalanced account. The court removed him as executor, ordered restitution to Eleanor and the lower farmers, and held him responsible for the damage caused by the unlawful diversion and sabotage. To satisfy the judgment, he sold Calder Field, Finch Meadow, and his controlling share in the pumping works. The former owners were offered the first opportunity to recover their land, while those who chose compensation received money from the sale. Augustus avoided imprisonment only after surrendering the disputed records and pleading guilty to falsifying estate statements and conspiring to damage property. He left Belmere under court supervision and was forbidden from holding another fiduciary position. Eleanor did not visit him before he departed. Forgiveness without restitution, she had learned, was merely another method by which powerful people escaped the cost of what they had done. The first payment awarded to Blackwater cleared the parish rates. repaid Martha's 11 shillings and sixpence with interest, and secured the Rusk family's tenancy in the miller's cottage. Eleanor placed the remaining money in a restoration account requiring 2 signatures, hers and 1 elected representative of the lower farmers. The old covenant became the foundation of a renewed Blackwater cooperative. Each member contributed according to means: money, timber, stone, grain, or labor. In return, the mill would charge regulated tolls, publish the river measurements quarterly, and reserve a portion of its income for maintaining the lower wells and channels. Not everyone joined. One farmer continued insisting that no vale should control the river. Eleanor did not try to silence him. Instead, she invited him to inspect the accounts whenever he wished. By spring, masons had rebuilt the west foundation with stone salvaged from the collapsed wall. Daniel designed a new wheel around the surviving iron fittings, but construction took 6 months. The measuring room required longer. Its copper lines were cleaned, damaged gears recut, and Josephine's master drum placed inside a new fireproof case above flood level. Her original plans were copied by hand and deposited in the county archive under her full name, Josephine Mercer Vale, mechanical designer. Eleanor sent a working model of the proportional regulator to an engineering exhibition in Birmingham. It did not make the family suddenly wealthy, nor did it repair the injustice Josephine had endured. But 2 small milling cooperatives commissioned simplified versions. Daniel established a workshop at Blackwater to build them, creating steady work for 5 men by the following year. Martha became keeper of the mill records. Anne Rusk managed the flour room and organized weekly bread deliveries to households unable to pay until harvest. Eleanor served as Blackwater's accountant and elected steward, a position renewed annually rather than inherited. 14 months after the sabotage, the new wheel turned for the first time. The village gathered along the bank. Water entered in 2 measured shares out of 5. The wheel caught the current slowly, lifted, and completed its first revolution without trembling. Inside the mill, restored gears engaged one after another. The grinding stone began to move. Daniel poured in a small measure of wheat, while Martha watched the Mercer register advance by a single exact mark. Flour emerged pale and warm beneath the stone. No one cheered immediately. The sound of working machinery filled the building too completely. Then Anne laughed, and the children joined her. Soon the mill yard carried the noise of voices, sacks, carts, and water. Ordinary sounds that Blackwater had been denied for 12 years. Eleanor stood in the counting room, where she had once calculated how many days remained before hunger and debt defeated her. The roof no longer leaked. The fireplace drew cleanly. Shelves held the cooperative accounts, Josephine's copied plans, Samuel's maintenance book, and Thomas Vale's final letter. Above the desk hung a modest brass plate. Every account must answer to something real. Eleanor had once believed her value depended upon persuading men like Augustus to recognize her competence. Blackwater taught her otherwise. Her father had not chosen her because no one else remained. He had chosen her because she could distinguish ownership from possession, prosperity from theft, and generosity from control. The ruined mill had never been worthless. Neither had she. At sunset, Eleanor walked to the upper sluice. The restored indicator rose smoothly from the bank, displaying the day's measured flow. Beyond it, water continued toward the farms, flashing gold beneath the autumn light. She locked the regulator and placed the key inside her coat. Then she returned along the mill race toward the illuminated windows of Blackwater, no longer the place to which she had been cast out, but the home she had made accountable to everyone it served.